Welcome to the Birth Boot Camp podcast, your trusted guide on your journey through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. I'm Holly, your host, along with Cheryl, Megan, and Liana that make up the Birth Boot Camp headquarters team. Together, we are here to explore the amazing world of childbirth and family wellness. Each week, we'll dive into empowering conversations with expert guests and share practical insights and heartfelt stories to support you on your unique path to parenthood. Whether you're expecting your first baby, you're a seasoned doula or childbirth educator, or simply curious about the miracle of birth, you're in the right place. Together, we'll celebrate the beauty of birth, honor the strength of motherhood, and embrace the joy of new beginnings. So sit back, relax, and join us on the Birth Boot Camp podcast, where every birth is amazing, every family is supported, and every story matters. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Birth Boot Camp podcast. I'm Holly Hopley, the CEO.
I'm Cheryl Ameling, the certification coordinator.
And I'm Liana Wolf, the administrator.
And in today's episode, we are going to talk about how every pregnancy and birth is different. We're going to focus more on the pregnancy aspect of it. And I think that, I don't know, my personal opinion, especially if you've already had more, is that, or if you've already had one kid in later pregnancies, is, realize how different they are. And we also don't honor that time enough. I know I didn't, especially after my first. So we're just going to kind of share our experiences. I think, let's see here, between the three of us, there's 14 kids, right?
Wow.
When you say that number, I'm like, wow. No, 13.
No, 13 and two somebody else's.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're counting pregnancies and births. Yeah.
Yep. Wow. There you go.
That's a lot, you guys.
That's a lot.
I know. It sounds like a lot between the three of us.
We've done this a lot.
Yep. So we're just going to kind of talk about our experiences with all of our pregnancies and what you might experience, what you may or what you may not experience, and all that fun stuff. So let's start out on the positives, though. What are things like, what did you love about being pregnant? If there was something.
Almost everything.
Really?
Really, I genuinely, I wouldn't say I loved being pregnant, but I was very good at being pregnant. And so I never had morning sickness. Don't hurt me. I'm one of those people who just didn't have any of the negative side effects. And even later in pregnancy, I never had the lightning crotch. I never had major pelvic issues. Just, my body really likes to carry babies. So I am not the norm for those who are listening. I'm not the norm.
Well, I think it's okay to recognize that your pregnancy for me is fairly simple and you enjoyed it. I've had clients like that. I remember teaching a class where she was like, I have felt great my entire pregnancy. Yeah. And I don't think you should feel bad about that.
Yeah.
So
I think it's common to feel bad, especially that first trimester. I kind of hated life and wanted to die every single first trimester. Yep. But I think it's also common for women to not, it can go both ways. Mm-hmm. So I think both are variations of normal.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, we always talk about this variation, and I think that it's the same in pregnancy. You have people who feel great, and then there's that huge spectrum there of some people who just feel a little sick, and some people who are really sick, and then there's people who have hyperemesis, so it's who knows? Because I'm usually sick till at least halfway through, if not a little bit longer. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm usually sick up until 12 weeks. That's kind of my tip over point of feeling better. My bookends, pregnancy 1 and pregnancy 6, were my those were my bad. And everything else in between there was I felt nauseous, I felt bad, but it was not horrible. It just sucked.
Yeah.
But my bookends were really bad.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a lot like we talk about all the time about how people tell their horrible birth stories, but you don't hear as much about the good ones, people who have great experiences giving birth, because they don't want they don't want to make other people feel bad.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same kind of thing. Like I often hesitate in the group of women when everybody's talking about their pregnancies and birth, and it's like it's my turn, obviously, because I haven't said anything, and I go, I felt great. And
Yeah.
it's like they're all like, how dare you? You know,
Right.
Yeah.
and it's all in jest and fun, but it's still one of those like, well, that's why we don't talk about it a lot, because you feel
Right.
bad that you
Yeah.
didn't
No.
have these horrible symptoms.
Okay, well, thank you for saying that, because when you said that you felt great, my instinctual reaction, I literally went, "Ugh." And so thank you for saying that, because I think we need to change that. Like we need to say, "Wow, I'm so glad." Like that's really not in a, like, well, good for you, but like
Right.
generally, like I'm glad that you that it wasn't a bad experience for you. So so I think it's good for us to hear that perspective from somebody who
Yeah.
did feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so important for us to like recognize that we all have different experiences and that's okay. Yeah.
And to
So, yeah.
celebrate all of them.
Right. Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. My pregnancies, all four of them. Well, even the ones that I miscarried, like I was sick as a dog. So my first one, I was teaching full time though. And so like I would be fine during the day. And then I'd get home and it was like my body knew, oh, okay. Like now you can be in bed and you can be sick the rest of the evening. So yeah, but
Well, at least I'm glad it was thoughtful to you that way.
Right. My others didn't care, but at least my first one, I think part of it was probably a mental thing. But I was always excited to be pregnant though. Like, even though I knew it was going to be hard, especially after my first, I was always excited to be pregnant. And I know that not everybody feels that way either. Because all of ours were pretty much planned. Like, it's what we wanted. So, I think that's another thing that we have to recognize too, is not everybody's excited to be pregnant. And I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about that.
Yeah. And how that's okay. Like all feelings are valid.
Yeah.
And I probably, because I mean, I think our second one was the only one that was probably like the most planned-ish. And so every time I had to kind of wrap my mind around like, oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, I'm going to do this again. Oh, we're doing it again. And so some more than others really did take more time to like really like embrace like, oh, okay, we're going to have a baby. And this is, because some of them were like, I mean, really poorly timed, like just in like the way life happened and what was going on in our, in our lives and with our other kids and everything. Maybe it wasn't the greatest time to have gotten pregnant, and so it took a little adjusting, a little bit of like, okay, this is what we're going to do, and it really will all be okay. But yeah, I think you're right. Like it was hard for me to even just say that just now, but so thank you for creating that space to do that. But I was, because it's really like, you're supposed to be excited. Like that's what's expected of you as a woman. And so to have like a minute of like, or even a couple of minutes or however long it takes you to be like,
or months.
Yeah. To be like, okay, all right, I'm excited. This is good. I think it's okay. So
we had friends of ours when we were pregnant with our first. So this was a while ago, but friends of ours came to us and announced that, in a roundabout way, announced that they were pregnant. And we were like, wait a minute, your oldest, like your only is 12. And she was an IVF baby. And wait, when are you due? You're due in 4 months. They didn't know. She thought it was perimenopause symptoms because her mom went and did early menopause. And so, but it wasn't until she felt that baby move. And if you've ever felt a baby move inside of you, there's no mistaking it for anything else. And she was like, she worked in a radiology lab. And so before she even went to her husband, she went to her boss and was like, can you do an ultrasound really quick? Because I
Wow.
peed on a stick and it was negative because she was so far along that her HCG
Right.
had already dropped back down. And sure enough, she was already like 18 weeks pregnant.
Oh my
Wow.
gosh.
And I remember talking to her husband a couple weeks later, and he was like, I'm not happy.
Yeah.
He's like, I know that I will love this child with everything in me when he's born. But right now, I am deeply unhappy that my retirement plans now are gone,
Yeah.
just dead in the water. And I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's valid.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of the, the feelings, I can't even imagine the feelings that she was having.
Yeah.
I mean, already halfway through a pregnancy.
Yes. Like no time to plan anything. They never thought they'd
Right.
have another child because their first was an IVF kiddo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
12 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Wow.
So,
Wild.
Yep.
yeah. Yeah. Well, mentioning have baby moving, I did love that. Like I loved the, the little wiggles and the, it gets kind of annoying sometimes at night when you're trying to sleep, the baby starts moving, but that really is magical. And I like when you can see it on the outside and you're like, oh, look, there's baby part.
I always
That's
felt
always
like
really
that
fun.
scene in Alien when they're gonna like punch through the belly. That was just what I thought of all the time.
Yeah.
Did any of you have like a spot on your body that like all of your children persistently pushed against?
Yes. Yes. I mean, it was different for each one, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like it would get sore. It would like bruise almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow with my anatomy, all 5 pregnancies, all 5 babies get into the same position and all of them dig their little heels underneath the right side of my rib cage.
That's
Ouch.
so unfortunate.
So it's constantly like I'd stretch and then like push down on their feet, like get out of there.
Get out of my ribs.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't have a position the kids were in, but I always had a spot underneath my ribs that just hurt. It didn't matter where the kids were. It just always, and I always ask my midwives, I'm like, this one spot just always hurts. And it's pretty much after, when they really start getting bigger in the last, probably in the last trimester. And it was just always sore. I don't know. So, but it didn't really matter what position they were in or anything.
Some ligament or tendon or something.
Yeah, there was something that didn't like that, but oh well. But I always got, after my first, I always had SPD. So I just hurt in general anyways. So that's why I'm like, when we talk about what did we like about being pregnant, I have to really think. I was excited to be pregnant. Yeah. I was okay for a few weeks, kind of after I finally, at somewhere between 20 and 25 weeks, all the throwing up would finally stop. And I'd have a few weeks where I would probably feel halfway decent. And then everything with just getting bigger and the baby growing and all that stuff, I just was so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of funny, like my pregnancies were easy. Like I didn't have a lot of pain. I was sick. I didn't have a lot of like common complaints. I just didn't really like it. And I think that I think I felt bad the whole time, but because I wasn't like super sick like that first trimester, it got normalized and I didn't realize how bad I really felt until the baby came out and I felt normal again. And I was like, dude, I felt bad that whole time. I had no idea.
You just lived with it. And so
I just lived with it. Yeah. And I wasn't throwing up.
Yeah.
But but otherwise, I mean, I had pretty like simple textbook pregnancies. It's just not my thing.
And that's fine.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. Because I always feel like a little bit like, especially like the work that we do working with pregnant women and I have, I have 6 kids, like it seems like I should like love it. And so it takes a lot for me to kind of be like, yeah, I kind of don't. And I think that's a variation of normal. I think if more women maybe heard that there are women that don't love it, then maybe they could feel okay themselves if they don't. Because we always hear like, there's like, I just love being pregnant. It's just the best thing ever. And I think that's so great. It just wasn't me.
And also trying to make sure that just because you don't love being pregnant doesn't mean you don't love the baby that you're growing.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Doesn't mean that you're not thankful for the life that you have.
Right.
Like
And
those things
excited
are
and all
not
those things.
exclusive. You cannot like it and still love the purpose of it.
Right.
And I think a lot of women, because our society put on the happy face, I think a lot of women, we feel like we have to be happy because we're happy with the baby. Like instead of oh, well, you're acting so miserable. Do you not want this baby? No, that has nothing to do with it. I can be unhappy with the way my body feels at the same time as I love this child. And it's another thing we don't talk about and we don't allow in the space.
Yep.
Right. Which then, I mean, this isn't the topic, so I won't go into it, but really does like bleed over into motherhood.
Yeah.
If you complain about being a mother, then like, that doesn't mean you don't love your kids or love the job that you have or whatever. So that's not the topic, but it really does. Like, I hadn't thought about that before, how we've conditioned women in pregnancy that then easily carries over into how we think about it and how we treat them in motherhood too.
Right.
Yep. I 100% agree. Yeah, that is. I'm like, that's a whole other topic. We could get into. Yeah. Did you guys, did you get a lot of attention from others? Like, did people say things? For me personally, I never did until way later. And that's one thing I hated, is because as a plus size mom, like I didn't feel like I looked pregnant until I was at least 30 weeks. And so I hated that part of it, but I don't know. What about you guys?
I got attention. I mean, let me hold the door for you, or I never got touched though. Thank goodness. Like people didn't come up to me and like touch my belly, because I don't want that. Like you wouldn't touch my non-pregnant belly. Don't touch my pregnant belly. But I liked when people were like, oh, do you know what you're having? Like I liked that. And actually it was kind of funny because I remember at one point, I think it was like with my last baby or something, somebody like didn't ask and didn't acknowledge. And I was like, excuse me. I'm pregnant. You better recognize. But then at the end, because I have the opposite problem, Holly, because I'm small and I just grow big babies, I would get all of that. Are you sure there's not twins in there? Oh, you must be due any moment now. I'm like 30 weeks. I'm like, oh no, I still have 10 weeks. And, so like the comments that people make are can be so thoughtless,
unnecessary, and really unnecessary.
So unnecessary. Yeah. Somebody that I was actually like friends with, she told me that my butt was getting big, and I was like, that's just not what you say to people. Like,
yeah, like when did we ever think that was okay to say to somebody?
Ever. Like literally ever. Right.
Can we just not comment on women's bodies?
Thank you.
At all.
Thank you. Exactly. Yeah. Well, what about you, Liana? Did you like that? Did you get attention? Did you like it?
I got a lot of attention. I'm on the slimmer side, and so I showed pretty quickly. And then I think, I don't know why, but I felt like a continent. I felt so huge by the end of my pregnancies. The only people that would touch my belly were children, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
Because they're children. And old people. And that bugged me. I'm like, you should know better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, they just thought it was totally fine for them to come up and not just like touch, but like touch.
Oh, no.
And I'd like back up steps. Like, no, thank you. I like my personal space. Don't touch me. but I had little kids, like think like pre-K and toddler, who would come up to me in stores. And this was more when I was pregnant in Arizona. And most of them were Hispanic kiddos who would come up. And so I think culturally they were a lot more like, I don't know for sure, but potentially culturally they're a lot more touchy-feely with their pregnancies. And it's okay for people to do that, because little kids that were from Mexico would come up and just be like, and I can't say it. I remember writing it down once, but basically in Spanish, they would ask if I had a basketball under my shirt.
Oh, that's cute.
Like, there's a ball under there. It's like, no, it's a baby.
That is so cute. I was out to brunch the other day with a friend, and there was this woman, the waitress, and from behind literally could not tell she was pregnant, like waist, all the things. And she turned around, and I like it caught me off guard, and it literally looks like she had a soccer ball under there. I mean, like, the only reason I knew that it was not a soccer ball was her little belly button stuck out, which was so cute. But I mean, I don't think I've ever seen like such a perfectly round, like high, tiny little like bump ever. It was precious. Did your belly button stick out? Let's talk about this.
Mine went completely flush by like the last month. It'd be like completely flat and stretched out against my belly. But
yeah, same.
That's all.
Mine
I never got
out.
the turkey ready button.
I have the turkey ready button. And it's so funny because I hated it. I wanted my belly to be like nice and round and smooth, like, you know, like a photoshopped belly or something. And to where like I would put a Band-Aid over it to try to like squish it down. I know. And now I'm like sad for me, because now I'm like, that's okay. That's all right. It's just part of your body. It's the way your body is being pregnant. And so now I wish that I hadn't done that I hadn't been so self-conscious about my little turkey ready button. Yeah. It's just, well, I think that's just a common thing.
Well, and I think as we get older, again, just as women, like you hit your mid-30s and get into and you realize how much you could have been enjoying that your body that you were so critical of. I remember being so critical of the way I looked in my 20s, and I look back and I go, what was my problem? Like, what did I have to criticize?
Right.
So and same kind of thing.
Yeah. So if your little belly button is sticking out, it is precious. Just embrace it. It's okay.
Yep. Okay, I feel like we've talked about like the physical, well, and we've kind of gotten into the mental, emotional, but like how did you guys feel like mentally and emotionally during pregnancy? Other than like, I just always felt like it was the roller coaster of highs and lows. How did you guys feel like mentally and emotionally?
I was mostly great. And I remember with my second, we had a home birth midwife, and I had asked her about like, is it normal that I'm not mood swingy? Like, I can think very specifically of times where I had that like irrational pregnancy moment, but they were not common at all. Like, there's only like 2 that I really think of over the course of 5 pregnancies. And so I'm like, is it normal? Like, is there something wrong with my hormones that I'm not having those mood swings? And she was like, well, when you're not pregnant, do you PMS? Do you have any of these things? Are you prone to anxiety or depression? And I was like, no. And she's like, that's probably why.
That makes sense.
And I was like, okay. And then she asked me how my postpartum was with my first. And I was like, pretty great. And she's like, yeah, it's probably the same reason. Like, if you're not prone to these different mood shifts when you're not pregnant, it's likely, not impossible, but likely that you're going to kind of stay the same during pregnancy, or your shifts are at least going to be shallower, I guess.
Yeah.
Instead of being big swings. So yeah, I mean, the bummer about the bummer with mine mentally, emotionally is my libido tanks. And so the intimacy between me and my husband struggles when I'm pregnant. So in that, but that, I don't know about that specifically towards me. It was just a marriage thing that we had to work through. And my husband was great and understanding, but it just, you know, that was the only thing that really kind of affected my mood, my emotional state, is because we struggled there.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I was just so sick during mine that's why mine was gone. Like, and that was actually something we struggled with after we had our fourth, and we were kind of like, we made that decision like that we were done. And I was like, okay, I'm never going to be sick again, was like, actually, you know, it was like we were done with pregnancy. I don't think he was totally weaned yet, but he was pretty close to it. And just, you know, how that can really affect things. So it affected us for years. So yeah. I think for me, kind of like I said, like I wasn't like super emotional, but I did have like the ups and downs, and just kind of there was a lot of like uncertainty, and I don't know. I just felt, especially with my first and not knowing.
So for me, I had, I think it kind of varied from pregnancy to pregnancy. I also, I mean, I talked already about how like some of the pregnancies took a little bit to like emotionally get on board with this. I think like once I started feeling better, I was really okay. I had with my last baby, I had a lot of fear going into that birth because my fifth experience, it was fine, it was great, it was perfect in every way textbook, but mentally it was really, really hard for me. So, so I had to do a lot of preparation for my sixth birth, like emotionally. So, so I did a lot of that work during that pregnancy. But otherwise, you know, I don't think there were like the highs and the lows that some women, you know, experience.
One thing I wish, we talk a lot about, like, and we've even talked about it before on other podcasts, of like, we wish that just there was more education for women about their bodies and what's normal and what they're going to experience. And I think that it needs to be the same way with pregnancy. Like, so many women go into pregnancy without really having any idea what, what, you know, that spectrum, that variation, you might experience this, you might not, you know, and all the things. And I think that this is something that like would be really important to include. Because I know I was with my first, I had no idea. And everybody picks up what to expect when you're expecting, and they start reading that when they're first pregnant, right? Yeah, Liana's face says it all. Not our favorite book, but because I think like some women experience like prenatal depression, you know, and things like that. And I think it's so important to recognize that like those are things. And yeah. So that was something that just popped into my head with thinking about, especially the mental and emotional aspect of it.
Yeah. I think physically too, like what to expect physically, like we know we're going to grow a big belly, right? I remember with my first pregnancy, it was like toward the end, my midwife asked if I had any discharge. And I remember thinking, because I didn't know anything about my body, I remember thinking that discharge was gross and that you probably shouldn't have it. And which is ridiculous, right? Like we know, like all through our cycle, we have all kinds of discharge. It's all normal. And so I told her no. She was like, "Are you having any discharge?" And I was like, "Oh, I probably believe that. Like, probably the right answer is no." And she kind of looks at me like, "That's okay." And then I was like, "Wait, was that the wrong answer?" And because I felt like I needed to give a right answer instead of like, I don't know. I was young. I didn't know. So I don't recommend that, friends. But I think like just knowing what to expect. If I would have known that this is a normal thing, then I wouldn't have felt shame associated with my discharge, you know? So I think like there's so many things emotionally, physically, mentally, that if we knew were normal, but then we would also know when it goes outside of normal.
And I think that's why, like having a doula, taking a good quality childbirth class, it all goes back down to that too, because you're going to learn those things in class. But if we can do some education before pregnancy, then that will, kind of help with a lot of that stuff.
Well, and even just comprehensive sex ed, like,
right.
I know, like, I was able to look at some of the sex ed curriculum for my kids' school, and it's straight out of a textbook, but it's not enough. It's still not enough. And I'm like, why are we not talking about something as normal as discharge, and how it is normal throughout your entire cycle
to
have variations of discharge, and that's part of your body's self-cleaning cycle, and it continues through your pregnancy. But teaching girls that this is normal so that it's not weird, so it's not scary.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's funny that like on so many of our podcasts, we talk about this subject. Like we all obviously feel strongly about it, but okay. So let's talk about kind of along the same lines of the mental and emotional is like the fears that we can experience, because I think it's the same thing. A lot of people are afraid to like express what things they're concerned about, have fears about, or afraid of. I know that was totally me, I think. And I think even like my first two pregnancies, like it goes back to what Cheryl was talking about with like that shame of like, is it okay to express that I'm afraid of these things? Like, and is this normal? Those types of things. Like I can totally look back and I'm like, oh, that's why I didn't talk about that. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of like if there was anything specific that I was like that I had concerns about. And I can't really think of them off the top of my head, but I know I had them. I remember like the feelings of it.
I don't know specifically, but I know I had some general fear about the baby being quote unquote normal. Like just make it like, what can I be doing to make sure that baby is completely healthy? And am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? What can I control? What can I not control? And then, I mean, I guess I had kind of vague fears about the birth itself. But I'm very pragmatic. And so it was just very much people have been doing this forever. It's not going to be a problem. Like I didn't have any confidence issues in my body in that sense. Like I didn't fear that I couldn't give birth. Mine was more of a fear that something would happen like in utero, that we would find out that something was wrong and it was my fault, which we all know is false.
Right.
You are
right.
If you are not doing drugs and drinking alcohol, then anything that happens to your baby is out of your control.
Yep. Yeah, I think I know with my fourth, we had our third, we had a home birth. It was a great experience. Like I loved it. But when I got pregnant with my fourth, just my gut was like, nope, you need to have this one at the hospital. And like I felt that way throughout my whole pregnancy. And everybody that I knew, when they found out I was having my fourth at the hospital again, they were like, you're not doing another home birth? Like people were so confused by that. And so because they knew I loved my home birth, but I was like, everything in me is saying to go to the hospital. And so that's what we did. I knew a lot of the midwives here at a really great hospital. And so my whole pregnancy, I was like, what is going to happen to me? Like, why is my body telling me that I need to be in the hospital?
Oh, interesting.
And so I did have a lot of like fear surrounding that. I was like, something bad is going to happen. And it did. Everything worked out great. It was super smooth. It was no issues at all. I don't even think I was at the hospital for an hour before he was born, so it was fine.
Yeah.
But I did have a lot of thoughts like that throughout his pregnancy of like, oh no. So I don't know. I mean, there's just this whole host of, and I think a lot of people will say, well, they're just these irrational fears. And I'm like, it doesn't matter whether you think they're irrational or not. If they're real to you and they're concerns you have.
Yeah.
You know?
And if that's something that you can control, then go ahead and trust your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he was born so quickly. Maybe if you'd had a home birth, the midwife wouldn't have made it on time. You know, it's like
right.
you can what if forever.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's no harm in trusting your intuition, go for it. There's no harm in, we talk all the time about your birth location. If you're not comfortable in your birth location, change it.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know. Can y'all think of anything else? Like, I'm trying to think of, like, just in general, what are concerns that new parents might have, especially during their pregnancy?
I mean, I think a lot of people worry about delivering, actively pushing out a baby. They worry about the risk of a C-section, and then they worry about breastfeeding because our society, we're not surrounded by it anymore. Right. It's not the village where you've seen your mom and your aunt and your older sister like nurse babies all the time, everywhere. And so you worry that maybe you don't have what it takes. And it's like, you're still biologically created to be able to do this. And there's a small percentage of women who physically can't. But I think that's a big one is, you know, what if I can't feed my baby? And we don't talk enough about the normal aspects of breastfeeding, because on social media, you have the people who are pumping 6 ounces each side.
Yeah.
And showing it off. And it's like, look what I just did. And somebody who's pumping 1.5 ounces, which is normal,
right?
Before you feed, they feel so inadequate and like they failed, and they need to boost their milk supply and they need to supplement. And we all
and even just normal newborn behavior, we talk about that a lot too. I know a lot of people, I've had lots of friends who they have their first baby and they have hardly ever been around infants. You know, so like there's that lack of knowledge there too, with like it's normal for your baby to wake up at night, you know, things like that. So yeah,
I was just at a birth Tuesday night, and second baby. And as soon as that baby was born and I was watching mom handle that baby, and I was like, oh, I don't need to help with this part, because they were so confident because they'd already held a fresh, squishy, slippery baby. And even dad, when it was his turn, he just plucked that baby right up and put it. And I was like,
yeah,
because I am often like putting the baby on them. All right, hold on to the baby, support the head. I'm going to wrap a blanket around you.
Yep.
And so that confidence that comes with subsequent babies, especially for people who have not been around babies.
Yeah.
It was really interesting because I was like, I don't have to do anything right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely different. So it's really funny. So before we started recording today, Cheryl and I were talking about how we wish that women would treat every pregnancy like it was their first. You know, the excitement, the like all that kind of stuff that comes with it. But I think that also goes down to like, how did you prepare? Because I feel like your first, you do all the things, right? Like you're doing just tons of stuff to get ready. You're taking all the classes, you're doing all this stuff. But then I know with other babies after that, if you have other children, that tends to be like the bottom of the list. Like, oh, we'll get to that if we have time, or lots of people think they don't need to. I know with my second, I didn't hardly do anything to prepare for that birth or for that baby. And because I was like, oh, I've already done this once. At that point, I had already gone through a doula training. Like, so even myself, I was like, no big deal. I got this. And not that her birth was bad, but it was probably longer and probably a little bit more painful than it needed to be because we just didn't do anything. We didn't practice any relaxation or anything. I just, in my head, I was like, oh, it'll all just come back to me. And I'm like, I really wish I would have like put some thought and effort into that. So with my third, we totally went back to like it was our first, and we like did classes again. We practiced all the things again, and his was probably one of my easiest births. And the same thing with my fourth. And so I wish that everybody kind of would have that mindset of like every pregnancy, every birth is different. Every baby, all that stuff I think is so important. So what about you guys? How was it different for you for each of your babies and kind of like prep and stuff like that?
Yeah, for my second, I was like, yeah, I've got this. I just did it. All good. I was probably like that until my last baby. My fifth one was so hard. So it was my first birth that I had been doing birth work and been assisting at births. And so I was thinking the whole time, like I was like thinking about the next step the entire time instead of just laboring, which made it really hard. So I did a lot of preparation for my last birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. I didn't do much for the second or the third. I felt like I was doing it because I was doing a home birth. And so I had like a whole hour with my midwife for the prenatal appointments. And so I felt like I was doing more, but I wasn't really. And they were not my hardest, but they were both in crummy positions. And, maybe I could have had control over that, maybe not, because babies are going to do what babies are going to do. So then with number 4, which was our first surrogacy, that was after I became a birth worker, after I had trained with birth boot camp. And so I was a lot more conscious about what I should be doing. And that was my easiest one. Easiest pregnancy, easiest delivery. The 5th one, I went, oh, the last one was so easy. I don't need to worry about anything. And that one was my hardest. Yeah. So yeah, definitely.
I think it would be interesting. I've heard a lot of women say that their 5th birth is their hardest, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. All right. Is there anything to kind of like finish this up? Is there anything that you guys can, like what am I trying to say? Sorry, my brain's just like slow. What, like, if somebody asks you for advice about pregnancy or, recommendations, like, what do you try to tell people about pregnancy in general?
Oh, I straight out the gate say you need to take a birth class.
Right.
That's not given by the hospital. And it's always like, I teach classes and I think the curriculum is the best. But even if you don't take mine, take a class that's not given by the hospital.
A good quality class.
Like,
yep.
Anything is going to be better than the hospital class. And if they have more questions, like I can't think of anything that I usually toss out except keep moving your body. Like, you don't have to go to the gym every day, but move your body every day. But otherwise, I'm like, take a class, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yep. Mine is simple, and I just tell people to take all the pictures. Other than taking a class, I tell people to take all the pictures, do all the milestones, do like have fun with it and enjoy that part of it. Even if pregnancy is really hard for you, try to do little things like that to help you enjoy it. Yeah. And it's worth it. Hire a photographer, take some good maternity pictures.
That's good.
It sounds simple,
like a typical firstborn and first pregnancy. Like, I did all the monthly, weekly bump photos in the house. And then we had maternity photos. And then the second and third are significantly fewer photos.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And that's why I liked that phrase, like treat every pregnancy like it's your first pregnancy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, with the surrogacy ones, I took pictures all the time because I was sending them to the parents because they loved the updated photos.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Feel free to send us a message if you have questions or thoughts about anything we talked about this week, and we will talk to you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Birth Boot Camp podcast. We're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it valuable, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more families on their journey through pregnancy and birth. As a token of our appreciation, we're excited to offer you our exclusive birth plan blueprint. Inside, you'll find expert guidance and a template to help you create a birth plan that reflects your preferences and desires for your birthing experience. Simply click the link below in the episode description to have your blueprint sent right to your inbox. Remember, your birth plan is a powerful tool for communication and advocacy during labor and delivery. Don't miss this opportunity to take control of your birthing experience and advocate for the birth you envision. Thank you again for listening. Be sure to subscribe, and we look forward to sharing more amazing insights and stories with you in our next episode.